1st of November 2022. In this Skidmark, I'm going to talk about the weapons issue in Ukraine. From the word go, it was quite obvious that the West is going to pump weapons into Ukraine at an alarming rate. And despite of warnings from Middle Eastern countries about the dangers of that weapon proliferation in the Ukraine, nobody listened. The West didn't pay attention and they did not listen. The Middle Eastern countries warned them about the dangers of so many weapons being poured into Ukraine without proper control. And yesterday I saw an article where a security expert reported on the numbers of weapons that they are finding in Sweden, Finland and Denmark. Weapons that were originally delivered to the Ukraine. Now, the Middle Eastern countries, analysts there, predicted that all those weapons that are falling into the hands of extremist groups in Europe is going to turn the European landscape into something that the Middle East had to learn to deal with. Radicals with sophisticated weapons. But the West didn't pay any attention to these warnings. As usual, in their arrogance, they think they know better. The articles that appeared in the media about the weapon problem and the black market and things like that were very quickly flushed out of the system. And I think what we have to, we have to accept that. There are forces behind the scenes that are driving the agenda, and they are all connected to the globalists, and the ordinary people better pay attention. Now, if you look at the weapons fiasco in Ukraine, there's also this hypocritical problem that the West feels that they are entitled to pump whatever they want into the Ukraine, but Russia is not allowed or is expected not to buy weapons from other countries. And the recent issue with the Iranian drones and missiles is a very clear indicator of that hypocrisy. The reality is the Ukrainian air defenses are powerless against those drones. And the ridiculous thing is this: they will use $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 missile in their air defense system to shoot down a $10,000 drone. It's ridiculous. Now, another issue is the difference between the Russian military industrial complex and the Western military industrial complex. Over many years, the West has deliberately and systematically deindustrialized themselves, all in the name of this so-called green philosophy. Where on the other side, the Russian industries expanded and built. The same happened in China, North Korea, Iran, India, all those countries built out their industrial capacity where the West reduced theirs. And then Ukraine war happens and we see ridiculous things like the whole Western bloc is running out of 155mm ammunition, and the manufacturers come back and say they can produce 12,000 rounds per month, but it will take them about a year to 18 months to tool up their factories because they haven't manufactured that for the past 6-7 years. And I mean, that's 18 months away. The Russians are shooting at them today. And that volume, 12,000 rounds a month. Think about it. On a good day, the Russians fire 6,000 rounds per day. So that monthly production will last 2 days in Ukraine. The West is in trouble. But these people that are so focused on fighting Russia don't pay attention to facts. Another thing is all these claims about the wonder weapons from the West. And started off when they started sending those anti-tank missiles and that kamikaze drones to the Ukraine. And within days, the reports started appearing on Telegram of how those systems are failing. Those javelins, they will hit a tank and bounce off it if that tank is moving. And there are guys that reckon that out of every 10 javelins fired, only one was successful. That's a hell of a high failure rate. And then the stories came out that those things are old and the batteries is done and the batteries don't keep charge and all of that. But the bottom line is those javelins failed, big time. And it was touted as a miracle weapon. The same with the switchblade kamikaze drones. Within a few days, the reports were on Telegram about those drones getting launched, and within 500 meters it just falls into the ground, falls down to the ground. And nobody could understand what the hell is happening. And then they realized the Russians are jamming the GPSs on those things. What the West didn't take note of was the tremendous development in air defense systems on the Russian side. Today it's generally accepted that they've got one of the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world. The Russians have been using supersonic and hypersonic missiles for many years. The Americans have done a test again, I saw on Sunday, tested one. And the analyst that responded in that article said, look, that was one aspect of the missile that was tested. There's a lot more, and there's been so many failures in previous tests. These things are 6 to 10 years away from production. Problem, the Russians are using those things today. And in the past 2 weeks, we've seen all those drone attacks on the Ukrainian infrastructure, and it was quite clear that the Ukraine air defense systems are powerless against those things, and those things are extremely effective, and they work well, and they're cheap. Many of the missiles that the Russians have to face from Ukraine, those missiles come at a cost that comes from hundreds of thousands of dollars each to millions of dollars, and the Russian air defense system take them down. Then you get a situation that they touted the HIMARS as the wonder weapon. Within a short time after the HIMARS arrived in Ukraine, we already saw articles of how many of those things European nations were ordering from America. And then the reality on the ground started coming out, and those systems were not as effective as they were touted to be. They're very complicated to operate, and it takes 18 months to 2 years to train a crew. And then there is apparently serious maintenance issues on them. Same with the M777 howitzers. Lots of stories were made about that howitzers, and Scott Ritter warned right from the beginning those things are not going to be effective and efficient in Ukraine. Those things were designed specifically for the Marine Corps, and many of the components has been replaced with lightweight materials to make them easier to transport. Most important, they were not designed to shoot that high volumes of ammunition every day. Yeah, there was one guy that showed an article on Telegram, a battery of 10 of those howitzers that the M777s are set up, and they start firing. By the time 10 shots has been fired, 9 of the guns are out of order. That's a high failure rate. And those guns are supposed, the Russians fire them like you use a machine gun. And they shoot dozens of rounds a day. The M777 just can't do it. And then there's the other issue. You look at the Russian, let's call it workhorses. Those things are very mechanical, don't have a lot of electronics in it. They can be maintained on the front, they're reliable, and they're robust. Whereas the stuff that the Ukrainians are getting from the West, many of those systems give lots of problems, and there's a huge issue with maintenance on them. And you take a highly sophisticated system that is hit by a stray bullet from an AK-47 and it hits a control panel, and that multi-million-dollar piece of equipment is junk. And you hear that story that Van der Crazy promoted as fact, that the Russians are stripping washing machines and fridges for chips to run their missiles and airplanes. It's a joke. But in the end, if it was true, it actually tells you how good the Russians are. But it is a bullshit story, we all know it. But she promoted it as fact. The other reality is, the Russian military-industrial complex is tasked of providing weapons to the Russian army. Weapons that are reliable, weapons that are practical, and weapons that are economical. You take specific pieces of equipment that is manufactured in Russia, the equivalent of that equipment that is manufactured in the West, in some instances, are 20 to 50 times more expensive. Why? Because the Western military-industrial complex is profit-driven. And that MIC of the West is the only winners in this Ukraine war. The only winner. But the Western leaders are blind to it. And then I want to mention this. In the Bush War in South Africa, there was pandemonium in our country when our soldiers had their first encounters with the multiple rocket launch systems. They were baptized the Stalin organs. And there was panic. I lived through those years. There was panic in South Africa about those things. But within a very short period of time, our Special Forces captured one of those things, and within days it was here in Pretoria. And pretty soon after that, Krijgkorps came back with an answer, and it was the Valkyrie. And that Valkyrie was hell of a good. But more importantly, it was economical to make. You must understand, South Africa didn't have a defense budget like the Americans. We were running on a tight budget. But Krijgkorps managed to make these weapons at an affordable price for the South African army. The same thing with the G5 cannon. That G5 howitzer was known as one of the best howitzers in the world up to today. Those guns were amazing. That is when weapons are designed and manufactured for application in specific terrain. And the Russians have that doctrine to keep their weapons simple, practical, robust, and economical. The West has embarked on that highly sophistication drive that is making their weapons so expensive and so complicated that they are impractical. Now, I just want to confirm this. I am not a military analyst. I'm not a weapons fundi. I'm just a guy that sees things and reads things and hear things and then just come to my own conclusions. And I'm sharing this for you mostly that you can just look, listen and think. Look at this article. Russians found drones with aerosolizing devices on them as if the Ukrainians were about or were already unleashing a virulent bioweapon in the air over Russia. There were lots of talk about it, but nothing in the Western press. And that is an old article. That appeared in July already. Then we have this one. Ukraine will receive new super-modern weapons from Germany. The German Chancellor announced that high-tech air defense systems, radars and reconnaissance drones will be delivered to Kiev's forces by Berlin in the coming weeks, while speaking at the university in Prague. Schulz added that his country will continue to provide all kinds of support to Ukraine for as long as is required. Now, this is also an article that has appeared in August already, and we all know this specific thing that he's standing on in this picture, that thing is not so good as they claimed it to be. Pentagon's New Deal, more weapons to be produced for Ukraine by 2024. While some Western countries call for peace, the Pentagon has signed a $182 million deal with an American arms manufacturer to produce advanced surface-to-air missile systems for Ukraine by late 2024. Well, good luck with that. I don't think Ukraine will still exist by 2024. And Germany again. Germany can assume special responsibility for arming Ukraine. Berlin can take on special responsibility in assisting Kiev to acquire necessary artillery and air defense, the conflict with Russia. Germany and many other Western countries have been arming Ukraine following the launch of Russia's military operation. The EU should organize a long-term and reliable division of labor between all partners in Ukraine. And that was a joke. And then there was this article, also in August. EU countries have ruled out sending their own militaries into Ukraine. And then we get this disturbing thing, and this was already in August. EU countries are running out of weapons, but not for Ukraine. EU defense ministers want to expand military purchases as their stocks are running out, said the head of European diplomacy, Borrell. However, Europe will continue to provide military and technical assistance to Kiev because the situation for Ukraine remains very bad. On August 29, the Council of EU Defense Ministers is being held in the Czech Republic. And that was in August, and they were already running out of things. And then there was this. This appeared also late August. Ukraine conflict. Ukrainian media publish a list of serious malfunctions with Western weapons. The howitzer M777, after frequent firing, the barrel does not fully return to its original position, which further disables the gun. After 30 shots, the bolt wedge needs serious maintenance. The SAU M109, due to intense shooting, the mirror wedge of the shutter and the sealing rings of the charging chamber completely burnt out. Now, there was many reports about the failures on those weapons. There's some more on that. The howitzer F870, the tightening mechanism is often broken and the nitrogen pressure in the balancing mechanism of the gun is reduced. SAU 2000, the monitors of the commander control unit constantly overheat, the charging system often fails, obturation rings quickly fail. SPG Crab, during intensive shooting the shaft breaks the fuse at the bolt wedge, the bolts of the bolt wedge break and bend. SPG Caesar. The aiming program calculates incorrectly. The first shot is always undershot by 600 meters to nearly 1 kilometer. Guidance block fail at random. Now that is all those wonder weapons that the West were talking about. And incidentally, within weeks, 1 or 2 weeks after those Caesars arrived in Ukraine, the Russians bought one from the Ukrainian army. And then this was in August already. Arms deliveries to Ukraine have depleted US stocks and may jeopardize the combat readiness of the American army itself. But do they listen? No, they don't listen. The politicians don't listen. Moscow denies Iran is supplying drones. The Washington Post report claiming Moscow is receiving Iranian drones for the military operation in Ukraine has been rubbished by the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. And I'm not going to dwell on that because we know that our story is still going around in rings. And then I'm showing you this. This is just an image to make you think. This is a boat catamaran that the Iranians are building. They are producing this. The West is unaware of what Iran is actually capable of. And then there's this article from the UN envoy Nebenzia. He's the Russian guy. Western military leadership openly admits that it cannot track the end user of its weaponry. However, it cannot be unaware of the fact that Ukrainian corrupt officials have established the channels to supply the Western weapons to the global black market. And did they pay attention? No, they just deny. And then there's this article. Taiwan has signed an agreement with the United States to purchase 4 MQ-9B Sea Guardian reconnaissance UAVs worth $555 million. The delivery of the first UAV is scheduled for 2025, the last in 2029. The cost of the agreement may increase to $700 billion due to additional costs for infrastructure construction and operator training. It's a joke. I'm sure the Chinese reads this and they just laugh. And then you have to look at this. You must stop the thing and just look at how the USA is proliferating weapons around the world. They need to rethink. Then there's this article. Germany crossed the red line. Germany has crossed the red line with Russia by sending arms to Ukraine. Moscow's ambassador to Berlin said on Monday, the decision undermined decades of reconciliation since the end of World War II and the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union. The very fact that the Ukrainian regime is being supplied with the German-made lethal weapons, which are used not only against Russian military service members but also the civilian population of the Donbass, crosses the red line. He added that Berlin should have known better, considering the moral and historic responsibility that Germany has before our people for the Nazi crimes. But nobody listens. Then we get to this. Germany refuses to increase the supply of military equipment to Ukraine. Rheinmetall has announced that it's ready to transfer 16 repaired Marder 1A infantry fighting vehicles to Kiev. However, there is one nuance. Germany does not issue a permit for their export to Ukraine. Moreover, we are talking about old armor vehicles that were previously on long-term storage bases. Back in the summer, Berlin first began to supply outright trash and then systematically reduce aid to Kiev. For example, the Germans simply blocked the supply of Leopard 2A4 tanks, Fuchs armored personnel carriers and Marder infantry fighting vehicles. But Berlin continues to deliver promises in accordance with the schedule. Yeah, I've read many articles where there was proof that the West were dumping all their old crap on the Business Insider. The US has given Ukraine nearly 1 million 155mm artillery shells. Now it's looking for US companies to build more of them. Wants to bring production up to 12,000 shells a month. That's only 400 rounds per day. According to Western propaganda, Russia, as on 2010, was able to produce 1.6 to 1.7 million artillery rounds annually, and likely much more now. That works out to about 4,600 rounds per day, or 10 times what the US is attempting to provide Ukraine. It's a joke. Then there's this Twitter post. I'm not sure most people realize that Russia's demonstrated capability to regularly shoot down most missiles and artillery rockets is a revolutionary development on the modern battlefield. No NATO military has the capability to do it. And that is the truth, we see it. And then there's this, the F-234. The fears of the US's allies in East Asia, such as those felt by Japan following North Korea's soaring rockets from overhead drills, are amplified by the failures of the American F-35 bought by South Korea, which reports 234 malfunctions with the equipment in a matter of just 18 months. And I've read many articles about this F-35. There's lots of issues with it. And this is just something for you to think, look at it and think where the US nuclear bombs are stored in Europe. Look at that. Europe is in this shit, and they don't know it. And then we come to that I've been talking about, that South African Valkyrie. This was Krijgkor's answer on the Stalin organ, and this thing was very effective and very efficient. And here is another shot of the thing in action. And it is well known that the South African defense industry in those years were capable of building extremely good ammunition pieces for these things. And then here, just to remind you, this is what the South African G5 looks like. And the soldiers that worked with these things can tell you stories about this thing. That is still one of the best howitzers in the world. But we know they're fucked up by this South African army we have now. Now on that note, thank you very much for listening to me. Please give a like, and subscribe and a share, and just take this information that I give you and think about it. One thing is for sure, Russia is going to win in the Ukraine. The only question is, what will the cost be? Thank you.